Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute. That's Community Advocates for Young Learners. It's my honor to welcome you here today. And this CAYL Catalyst webinar series is a conversation that we want to have with each of you to provoke new ideas and new thoughts about our field. Our goal is to bring timely, relevant, and immediately actionable ideas and topics of interest to you about young children and the people who work with them. We are the CAYL Institute. And on today's call, there are dozens of community-based leaders and people who have participated in intensive CAYL workshops and experiences since we were established in 2003. Welcome. And I also want to give a special welcome to all of the students from Pennsylvania who are participating with us today. Our CAYL webinar series is on topics that we offer both as an invitation and as a challenge. We issue this invitation and challenge because, especially now, it is critical that we understand the importance of thinking simultaneously about the field's present and also thinking about our aspirations for the future. Now is a time that we need to be engaging with each other in order to figure out what is our collective thinking about the quality of life for our children and their families. This is also an important time for us to advance early childhood education as a field of practice. And there's perhaps no one better prepared to kick off this conversation than our speaker, Ed Green, who's an expert in early childhood education and media environments. He has experience working through NAYC, the High Scope Foundation, the American Camp Association, Sesame Workshop, and many other digital media initiatives. There's going to be commentary by two practitioners following Ed's talk. The first one will be from LaToy Adams, a media researcher, education consultant, and president of Wonder Why Consulting. She's conducted a lot of user experience research on classroom management, educational virtual reality field trips, and 3D modeling software. Deb Timmons is the director of the Eagle's Nest Play to Learn Center, and she has a lot of great examples of how she works with children, technology, and their families. This webinar is brief. It's only an hour. So we invite your questions and reflections throughout the presentation. You can go on the Q&A or you can go on chat. And we also want to tell you about a special opportunity following this 1 hour webinar. If you want to interact with the speakers, you should have received a special link and we'll be putting it in the chat so that you can connect to it and have a conversation with the speakers following the webinar. Today, we are exploring the issue of children and technology. And this very week, Time magazine reported that 77% of children from age 5 to 12 spent at least 4 hours a day on devices, compared to 39% a year ago before the pandemic. Today, we're going to talk about Generation Alpha and their interactions with technology. You may be wondering, who is Generation Alpha? Well, Generation Alpha is that generation of young children that's been born since the year 2010. They are the infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and young elementary school children that are in our midst today. And in all of these types of families with these children are typically very immersed with technology on some level or another. Unparalleled interactions with technology, even when compared to their parents, their millennial parents, many of whom themselves were digital natives. Technology is infused into the Alpha's young lives by parents who are quite comfortable with digital innovations and who are preparing their children for a life online, sometimes even before they're born. I'm sure many of you, like I have experienced, especially during COVID, watching our children, our friends' children, growing up online, on Facebook. This is a common experience today. But when it comes to social media for alpha kids, there are many different opinions. Often, millennial parents are quite comfortable connecting their children to innovative technology tools, such as health wearables and artificial intelligence techniques that are used in doctors' offices. A recent study just found that 40% of millennial parents are open to replacing or supplementing a human nanny with a robot. Yes, 40% said that they would do that. And 3/4 of them are saying they'd like an artificial intelligence tutor for their child. Still, many educators worry about the impact of this technology exposure on children's creative play, for example. One professor stated that years ago, if you gave a kid some Play-Doh, the kid would form something or do something with it. But too many children today look at the Play-Doh and don't know what to do with it. Other researchers are worrying that not only has screen time been linked to language delay and smaller vocabularies, but studies show that more television that children watch, infants and toddlers especially, the more likely they are to be inactive and obese, have difficulty sleeping, and show aggression. Many educators advise that young children learn best by relating to real life people and also by moving and doing things. So, what is the impact of all of this technology on child development and learning? How soon should children be exposed to it? How much is enough? How much is too much? What should we as teachers and educators and parents be choosing? With technology infused into the lives of these children since infancy, Generation Alpha really can't imagine life without it. These children are intrigued by, they're not afraid of the technology. They like punching around to see what it can do. More than 80% of parents with children under 6 say that their children are watching videos or using electronic devices for many, many hours every day. And many of these parents are saying they're doing it too much. And these studies were before COVID. Time spent with new technology certainly gives children a great deal of confidence in their knowledge about them. So studies show that children born after 22 perceive themselves as tech savvy. They're growing up with Siri and Alexa. Talking to a device is comfortable to them. It seems normal and natural. But really, young children and technology is still something pretty novel. Ashley Thale, who works with a research company focused on Generation Alpha, said in an interview with Good Morning America that this is an experiment. It's an experiment that we really don't know what's going to be the result of it. She's worried that our children may have diminished capacity in their practical skills and assessing and approaching risk or achieving their goals. Well, whatever the risks and benefits of this wide-scale social experiment, it's very clear that kids like and want this technology. Many of these children, especially in smaller families, have their own devices, so they don't have to share with anyone or negotiate their use. Certainly, when I was growing up, we had one television and we had to negotiate what was going to be watched and when. And have you ever tried or seen somebody try to take a device from a toddler? Wow, that can be quite an experience. One child said in an interview that they would rather have an iPad than a dog. And you know what? Commercial interests know that these connected alpha children are a very lucrative market, and they influence their parents' buying decisions. So as these companies know more and more about how to personalize experience on these devices, a lot of questions are going to be raised. One of which is, who owns the data that's being collected on alpha children? So, what is the impact of all this technology on alpha children? How does it or how might it impact play, social skills, family life, or learning? To answer these questions about alpha children and technology, we have three speakers today who are going to explore their experiences and ideas with us. We know that opinions vary. We know that many parents and teachers are confused about how to select the best platforms for young children. And there's a lot of commentary about the impact of all of this technology. So let's begin our focus on technology and young children with insights from Ed Green. Following Ed's talk, he is going to introduce Deb Tamitz, who will then introduce LaToya Adams, and then we'll all come together online to have a conversation about these ideas. So I encourage you to write in the chat. And at this moment, I want to bring our attention to Ed Green. Welcome, Ed. This is a very exciting topic here today. You're on mute.
There we go. It said that the host had to unmute me. I guess they didn't want me to get started too quickly.
We want you to start now. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I think that you've set the stage for the background knowledge that hopefully people will continue to think about as we move through this particular session, but also following it. I'm basically the warm-up act for Deb and LaToya, who are incredible practitioners and professionals themselves who will have, I think, some really, really insightful content for you to think about. But one of the things that I really wanted to be able to do today was to be a little bit provocative. Back in 2006, there was an American media scholar by the name of Henry Jenkins, who was at MIT at that time, and he's at, I think at USC right now. But he used a term called media convergence. And that's the flow of content across multiple media platforms. It's the cooperation between multimedia industries and the migratory behavior of media audiences. And convergence is a word that manages to describe technological, industrial, cultural, and social change, depending on who's speaking and what they are actually talking about. Now, I raise this because he became involved in defining this notion of convergence in 2006, well before our current pandemic. And one of the things that he did say is that none of us can know everything. Each of us knows something, and we can put the pieces together if we pool our resources and combine our skills. Collective intelligence can be seen as an alternative source of media power. We are learning how to use that power through our day-to-day interactions with convergence culture. Right now, we are mostly using this collective power through our recreational life, but soon we'll be deploying those skills for more serious purposes. Now, mind you, he wrote that in 2006. But what I want you to keep in mind is that this whole notion of convergence of all of these different forces, we're going to have to be actively engaged in. Valora already mentioned the whole notion of Generation Alpha. And one of the other assignments that I want to give everyone is to make sure that you read the book, because there's a section in that book that refers to the living in a tech-immersed social experiment. And that's exactly where we are right now. In all types of families, the Generation Alpha engages with technology in ways that are unparalleled than before, and particularly before we reach this period with the pandemic. I just want to move very quickly and be able to say that one of the, the quotes from Dr. Washington's book is, for millennials and Generation Z, technology still may be a tool, but for alphas, It's the way life is. I want to do a few things. I want to start just very briefly by talking a little bit about early care and learning and how it's been impacted. I want to look at some pandemic trends that have impacted us, and then jump into looking at some tech products that have been developed that I think relate to this convergence conversation that we need to have. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure I shared, which you already know, or many of you already know, is that early learning and the pandemic are things that are of great concern. It has ravaged the early childhood and child care field and system of care and education. And through thousands of low-paid workers are totally out of work now. And because the industry shrank by 20%, and nearly 200,000 childcare workers lost their jobs. Now, I'm raising this just simply because we have an issue related to human capital that we're going to have to deal with as we move through this pandemic, which means that we're all going to have to become much more engaged, much more media literate, so that we're able to take advantage of, as well as do those preventive things that we need to do with respect to technology and tools. Just wanted to also share that in terms of thinking about preschoolers, children ages 3 to 5 have all lost important learning opportunities outside of this environment that we generally refer to as congregate care or child care or early childhood education. But interestingly enough, in the pre-pandemic stage, 51% of 3-year-olds and 71% of 4-year-olds participated in preschool. By the fall, this past fall, attendance had dropped to 32 and 40%. So I say that just simply because people are going to be coming back. Children are going to be coming back. How do we begin to think about being prepared? The other thing that happens also as children will be coming back and teachers are coming back, that there are a lot of discussions about some of the trends and patterns around kindergarten attendance, particularly. There are some who feel that kindergarten and particularly many low-income children who have not been able to experience that will be far behind. National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers really talked about this through a recent study. But one of the problems is that some school districts will be flexible about placement, about where children will go, and will work with parents to assess that. But some early childhood experts say parents should be given an option as to whether or not they want their child placed in the grade or age group that they're supposed to be in versus being held back a year. Now, I say this also because there are going to be some strategies that have to be used in order to be able to meet the needs of children regardless. And I do think that technology will have a role in that. I'm going to move along and say that in 2019, big data, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, all of those kinds of things were beginning to make themselves known in educational technology. But distance learning has become the one trend that rules them all. The COVID-19 pandemic has drastically changed the way we teach and learn. And students now have to get used to distance learning via digital platforms due to social distancing. And even though some schools are reopening as we speak today, this trend may continue into 2021. Now, I mention that because even though last year a lot of people were thrown into using a variety of different approaches to communicate with children and families and using online tools, that is not going to go away. So we're going to have to spend some time thinking about how we move to the next step. 63% of parents with school-age children were more concerned about screen time now than before the coronavirus. More than half of the parents surveyed in the study that Near did were also worried about their children's ability to maintain friendships and social connections. That's another part of what has been used in the area of digital media and particularly in terms of some of the communication tools. So I want you to keep in mind what Henry Jenkins says, that we're in a convergence culture. And now we are ready to use what we've only briefly been exposing children and families to, and that many of us have been learning to use. Estimates that last year's switch to remote school in the spring set white students back 1 to 3 months in math and students of color 3 to 5 months back. In December, the American Academy of Pediatrics warned of vision problems from staring at screens too long or too close. I'm raising these because there are other social and cultural and physical issues that are going to be put into play as well. But there's good news. I wanted to raise something that Valora did mention about the different ways in which devices were being used. And partnerships are going to be a way that we begin to learn more about how we can effectively learn about as well as use tools. Alexa, as many of you know, has been a part of our environment for quite some time. But the National Center for Learning Disabilities has just been involved in a partnership with Amazon to look at how those kinds of tools can be used with students, and in this particular instance, students with learning disabilities. Because the whole notion of attention and keeping track of assignments and dealing with other tasks to keep them on track, especially during COVID, has made these daily activities even harder. So Amazon and the National Center for Learning Disabilities have been looking at how to create within Alexa those tools that will be able to help students to be able to control and to use their time more effectively. I just lost my screen. I'm just gonna continue here with partnerships being a very important piece, especially in the assistive technology field. Many of you may be aware that in early childhood and early childhood special education, there's not always been conversation between the two, but the individuals who were involved in early childhood special education, as it was referred to for many years, and dealing with the differently abled, are very important partners because they've been dealing with assistive technology for well over 40 years. So there are places like the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that has developed a series of different types of properties that help people to be able in this COVID environment to look at how the delivery of distance learning can be effective in terms of special needs kids. They have a video series that starts to look at the early childhood education in extraordinary times and how you teach through screens and not on screens. So those individuals at Frank Porter Graham who are looking at this issue of technology and special needs are also seeing ways in which these tools can be used that can be effective, but we as educators and as family engagement specialists need to know about. Briefly, in the international arena, I just wanted to raise the fact that there are cross-national conversations going on in conjunction with the Organization of American States. And several teachers from Costa Rica have been involved in looking at how to deliver their particular tools and resources to parents and children. And as opposed to using some of the strategies that we have used, like Zoom or Google, they're using WhatsApp in conjunction with the Ministry of Education's support for ways of providing information using texting and using WhatsApp as a way to get daily messages to teachers. My timing is running out, but I wanted to say that the multi-generational approach to dealing with these issues is something that we also need to be aware of. And AARP has been partnering with several organizations to look at how grandparents can be given resources to guide their work with virtual education. So they're beginning to develop more resources and materials around digital media and technology. To close out, I'm just going to go very quickly, get back to my screen and see if I can't do that. I'm going to share this very quickly. One of the things that I wanted to do was to share with you the fact that there are many tech tools that are being developed in collaboration with others. And I want to strongly recommend that you take a look at what's going on with Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media has developed several properties that many of you may know about. The Device-Free Dinner Campaign is a whole way of helping families to look at taking those particular pieces of communication equipment away from the dinner table. And they have strategies to help people do that. The other thing is that there are groups like Sesame Street that are working to build other opportunities for materials and resources to be pushed out, that some of which are no tech, some are low tech, and some are technology assisted. The other thing is that many public broadcast stations across the country have launched statewide learning channels, which are taking the local situation and putting them into television, because many people can get access to that, even though we're talking about the kinds of ways in which we can use digital media tools. Television is still a primary source for many people who don't have access to internet. And then you have groups like the Khan Academy, which provides free materials that really help you to build a package for the work that you can do with children at home or work that you can do in your own environment. I'm going to close really quickly by saying that I wanted to be provocative enough for us to say that in all that I've been talking about, one of the biggest obstacles is our rear view mirror thinking. In other words, our knowledge and skills and ways of being engaged or being taught or being cared for are in the past in many ways. There are a lot of things that are already in motion that we have to be ready to pay attention to, but we have to really also block out some of those things that cause us to keep looking back and not challenging ourselves to look forward. The digital natives versus the digital immigrant question is lessening. Millennials, who are parents of many of the youngest that we're talking about, are probably a little more in tune, but I love this cartoon because it's really stating something that's really important, and that is that you might really have to look at your child's blog to find out what they did today if you're not already aware of that. I'm very, very pleased that we're having this conversation. Hopefully in our conversations a little bit later, we'll talk some more, but you'll be getting some additional really exciting information from our following speakers. Finally, build healthy relationships. That's the main key for how we can move forward with and without these various sources of digital media and technology. If we learn to teach children to ask questions and we teach children to be critical thinkers, that will help us also to begin to find out how they're using the world around them to make sense of it and to make sense of the technology. That's where I'm going to stop right now. I wanted to give you a few things to think about. Hopefully that'll help to encourage the discussions that'll go on. And now I'd like to really turn things over to the real experts. And I'm going to say, LaToy, what do you think about all of this?
Thanks, Ed. Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. So yes, I'm LaToy Adams, and I'm a researcher and a consultant and president of Wonder Why Consulting, where our job is to weave the voices of kids and families and educators into the production of products and services designed for kids and families from concept to launch. And in doing this work, we are supporting some of the world's leading producers of children's media and education technology. And the vast majority of our work encompasses early childhood. So that's kids between ages 3 to 8 and their families and educators. So I'm joining you today to hope to start adding to the discussion about evidence-based content and products, and to help us talk about what it means to conduct research and the value that it offers, both to the those of us who are consuming the content and consuming the product, but also who have an opportunity to help impact the development of it through research. And to engage more in that inquiry process that Ed just talked about when he showed us the Namely slide about asking questions and in helping kids engage with media as critical thinkers. And then finally, to get involved in the process ourselves whenever the opportunity presents itself. So let's get into it. So still today, many of the educators and families that I speak to are surprised to learn that there are educational technology developers and children's television producers who are integrating research into the development of their stories and of their products. So this is what we call formative testing. And formative research is the kind of research that happens during the creation of the system or the story. And that can happen at many stages. It could happen at the conceptual stage when it's just an idea and it doesn't even exist yet, not even visuals. It can happen later on when there's some sort of design or script that can be visualized for children and families to respond to. It can also happen later on in production when there are storyboards, or early animation, or an interactive build for folks to engage with. When researchers are working together with developers and producers to gather feedback, they are trying to understand a number of things. Often what we're looking at in our work at Wonder Why is comprehension. So do children, families, educators, do they understand what the system is designed to do, how it works? Is it communicating the intended message? And does it provide the kind of opportunities that might indicate that there could be some learning potential? Another thing we're often looking at is appeal and resonance, and how children attend to or engage with the story or the product that's being developed. So how we do this in our research, we build relationships with schools and community centers and organizations based in, here in New York where we're located, as well as around the country. And those partnerships, those collaborations are integral to the work that we do and have been to me personally in my career as long as I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. And we find that um, working together with children directly back in the day before COVID, when we were often in the school ourselves. Now, of course, we are working entirely remotely. So it's a different feel, and I'm excited to tell you about how that has actually helped us in ways we didn't expect, as I'm sure you can relate to. So when we're thinking about media as consumers, as parents, as teachers, as young adults, even, or those who are charged with the care of young ones, we're often thinking about what quality means to us and how we determine what that is. And that work is often very personal and background in our values and in our context and our culture. One thing that I find that can be useful in that evaluation is wondering about whether or not the product or the service or the media has been tested. And when you're trying to figure that out, there's a couple of indicators that might help you determine that. So when you're watching the credits or exploring the About section of the app, they might list researchers or consultants who were involved in the production process. Sometimes producers and developers will publish the results of their studies, particularly if it's of the evaluative type of research, which is different than the summative discussion I brought up earlier. When we're thinking about evaluative research, the question is, what impact might this system or this app or this story have on how our children think about the world or themselves, their knowledge, and or their abilities, their skills. And depending on what the objective of the tool or the system, whether it's a reading app or an app designed to promote discussion between intergenerational discussion about the media that's being consumed, one of the questions you want to ask yourself is, how do they know what they know? So when you're looking for content and products for your family and for schools, we hope that this discussion today will encourage you to think about how it was put together and whether or not voices like yours were included in the process. So when we're doing this research, we're often asking questions. And like researchers, teachers often find themselves crafting the right question to uncover their students' perspectives and their thinking on whatever the lesson is. Parents may find themselves often asking questions to figure out, as Ed has shown us in the illustration, what happened today. And that can feel like the biggest challenge of all. And sometimes it takes a lot of practice. Many of us are now doing this more through screens than we ever have before. As I mentioned, prior to the pandemic, we had done a lot of our research in person, and now we're doing it entirely through screens. And as a result, we're finding that our parents, the parents of the children, are way more involved than they ever would have been than if we were showing up on site to do research directly with the children. And the parents will find out about what happened afterwards. Now they're right there, and it's a wonderful new way to engage in this work, and it's a great experience for us too. During testing, parents are telling us that they're often surprised to see how much their children understand of the stories, the designs of the products, or the underlying takeaway messages that the producer or developer are intending to communicate. And even when it seems that their children aren't paying attention, because it's not unusual for us to create scenarios where children are participating in other tasks while they're consuming media. And we all benefit when we help parents engage more in the inquiry process with us as researchers and as educators. And we have a lot to learn as researchers from from the educators that we work with. And we value those partnerships and take a lot of our perspective and approach to developmentally appropriate research practice from the field of early childhood education. And so I'm just going to check our time because I would like to wrap up now to switch over to Deb. Thank you so much, and looking forward to continuing the discussion. So I'll turn it over to you, Deb.
Go. Hi, thank you, Latoy. So my name is Deb Temez. I'm a teacher here in Texas. I have been teaching for 12 years. Teaching is my second career. I have been teaching, I've taught pre-K, first grade, I've taught Head Start, second grade, fourth grade. I've taught in 4 different school districts from urban to rural. And my most recent experience with public schools was being the digital learning coach for a school district that served about a little over 6,000 students. And we had 440 teachers. And so as a digital learning coach, I left the classroom. I was teaching first grade. I left the classroom to go in and be in the technology department. My job entailed that I train all staff and administrators in implementing an LMS, a learning management system. And so the LMS that we used is Canvas. So we originally had a 3-year rollout plan, and I was going to be training teachers from secondary to primary on how to implement technology. We became a one-to-one school district. So every student in every classroom had access to some type of technology device. If it wasn't an iPad, it was a laptop. As the months went on, going into the second semester, as I was training teachers, we hit the pandemic, we went into quarantine. And so then I became help desk support help for not just teachers, but for parents and students of all ages, from pre-K to 12th grade. It was such an eye-opening experience for me because it was a roller coaster of technology experiences. I had parents and students who had zero experience with technology, to students who had some knowledge. And I will say that I've always taught in low socioeconomic school districts and classrooms and schools. So to see the variance I had during the quarantine was very eye-opening for me as an educator. Fast forward a few months, we got out of quarantine. I went back to the classrooms to visit specifically early childhood classrooms because my passion is with that age group. I love the primary grades. And one particular experience, something that was very shocking for me, walking into a first grade classroom, these kids were in kindergarten when we went into quarantine months ago. In our school district, we opened up, we still had virtual, and we also had students in class. And I walked into this classroom, and of course, the teacher is a little flustered because not only is she having to teach in person, but she has kids that are asynchronous and synchronous. So she had a lot on her plate. And so the kiddos, she had tasked them to just write their name on a piece of paper, and that was a struggle in itself. Kiddos were not familiar with all the letters or the sounds of the alphabet. A lot of them still struggled in writing their name. And that really affected me as an early childhood educator because just those past few months of quarantine, look what it did. And we did put everyone in a virtual learning environment, like I said, down from pre-K to 12th grade. And it was my job to train not just students and teachers, but also parents as well, to access their assignments, their lessons, the videos, all through this LMS. And so to see that the kids in the younger grades were still kind of out of touch. Some of them couldn't even hold scissors and use them correctly, not even cut. And these are skills that you learn in kindergarten. And so that, like I said, that really impacted me, especially because as I was moving on through classrooms and seeing all this, I was also preparing my early learning center. I left that school district to open my program. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute or two. But I wanted to backtrack and talk about my experience in teaching in the Head Start classroom, pre-K classroom in first and second grade. I am a person who loves technology. I am all for it. But at the same time, I do have some concerns with technology, especially with the generation that we're working with today. 10 years ago, when I taught, kids came into me with no experience with technology. I taught Head Start, and my kids were coming in, playing and learning and getting those skills. We're working on those social development skills. We're learning how to share, how to take turns. 5 years later, I'm in a different school district teaching a different grade, still in a low socioeconomic community. Parents were just getting smartphones. Kids had access to technology at home when years ago my kids didn't have access to technology at home. So now I've got a community of parents with smartphones, and the kids have been exposed to at least some type of technology device like an iPad or a tablet. And I did teach one-to-one. I had iPads in my classroom. I was a teacher who had my students for 2 years in a row. We looped up. I was called a looper. And I flipped my math lessons. I flipped my science lessons. I implemented Edmodo and other technology applications with my 6 and 7-year-olds. I trained my parents how to access their projects that they were submitting through EduCreations or ThinkLink. My students were presenting research through educational applications. And it was an amazing experience for me as a teacher and to see my students grow. About 75% of my students went on to the GT program after my 2 years with them. So that's why I embraced technology in the classroom. But as a teacher, I had to not just meet my students where they were, but do the research and look at programs and applications that were being designed by developers. Are they appropriate? Are they age appropriate? And are they effective for what I need them to be with my students. So here I am in 2021. I'm the owner and director of the Eagles Nest Play to Learn Center. And as much as I love technology, I do not offer technology in my play center. And the reason for that is because I've got these 3 to 4 to 5-year-olds in my center who already have so much exposure at home. They're telling me about applications that they use. Hey, Miss T, do you got an iPad? Hey, Miss T, do you have a tablet? They want to be on devices. And I've been open for a few months now. I did open during the pandemic. And I was really scared to do that because of the daycare centers around me were shutting down. There wasn't a lot of enrollment happening in our area. We're in a very rural county here in Texas where I live. And I just, decided to do it. And I'm glad I did, because the kids that I have in my program, I have the country kids and I've got city kids. And my city kids came in wanting to use iPads and such. And I said, no, we're going outside to play and learn. My center evolved in just a few months. We went from a play-based to a nature-based. We're set out on 15 acres of property. We have 15 acres of raw land. So we go out and we're playing in the mud. We're pushing logs, we're stacking them up, we're jumping on them, falling off the logs. We're raking, we started a garden. We're learning through play and through nature. And since I've turned my program around to be more nature and play-based, it has been amazing. Not a single time have my students now asked me to use an iPad. And so it's ironic compared to what I was just doing a few months ago, being this digital learning coach, pushing the technology, getting everyone set on technology. We're going to be virtual learners. This is how we're going to do it. To now, I'm a director of a play-based center where I don't have technology for my students. We are literally outside 3 to 4 hours a day. We don't get a lot of cold weather in Texas, but when we do, it's cold, like 30 degrees. We got snow a month ago. We were out in the snow playing. We were out there making stuff in the mud kitchen. And so my kids are learning so many skills just with playing. Yes, I throw in academics. We have an alphabet tree. We made alphabet ornaments to go around a cedar tree. And my kids know the different types of trees out there and when they bloom and when it's allergy season. And it's amazing how much they're learning. And they're learning this through play in nature, not on a technology device, because I know they're getting technology applications and experience at home with their families. They all have some type of device at home. And I know this because I specifically asked them in my conversations during enrollment, how much screen time is your child getting? Not just TV, but on iPads and tablets. And so when Ed was talking about that, those numbers are very true to form. I mean, I'm hearing those numbers. They're on it several hours a day. If they're not with me and they're at home, they're on this iPad. And when they're with me 5 days a week, there's not an iPad in sight. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to the rest of the panelists for a group discussion and get more of insight from them as well.
Thank you all. I have learned so much listening to you all talk about technology, how it's chosen, what our situation is. I'd really like to just explore some of these ideas. Deb, I'm really intrigued with how you have changed your approach to early learning over the past decade as a result of watching who the children are. And that's a really important point that I make in my book about Generation Alpha. If we're planning for children and families today, we have to realize that childhood is not something static that you read about in a book. Childhood is evolving and emerging, and your use of technology has changed based on your observations of that.
Correct. It really has. And like I said, I've been lucky enough to be in a position where I've seen both sides, I guess you could say, of the spectrum, where I've been there pushing the technology, getting my kids there, and I'm seeing improvements, and I can see it when it's used effectively. And then coming back, and again, I'm in a rural school district in a rural area, very different from when I taught in Dallas, where it's a big city. And we're out here And just to see the differences after we came back from quarantine, it just really threw me for a new number. And I literally, when I opened my center, I totally changed my whole entire concept of how I wanted students to be engaged when they were at my early learning center.
Yeah, Deb and Latoy, one of the things I was really interested in is you all brought a lot of knowledge and information to how you even select materials, educational materials for children. If there's just one or two takeaways that you would give to the parents and early childhood educators listening to this webinar, the selection process seems complex. There's so much out there. How is there one or two things that we could take away to look for when we're trying to select technology programs or apps for our children?
Sure. I hope that if it's possible, being able to find out if the system or the educational tool or technology, has been created in consultation with researchers and educators, that might help in building one's own confidence that that the product or service might be a good fit. Um, and because at least then that there's, and compared to those that don't, there's an extra level of care. And it's also often the case that, particularly in large districts, when educators don't often have a lot of autonomy in what systems they get to integrate into the classroom, and they may need district approval, and the folks at the district level are often looking for efficacy and evidence before they would allow certain tools into their system, or making sure that it has the right protocols to meet the district's requirements for security and also efficacy in terms of, like, does it do what they say it does. So research is in consultation and collaboration with the community. If you can find that that's happening, then I think that's the great place to start if it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree with that. Definitely the research and community.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think it's really important too to find ways of having experiences that can be shared. Sometimes in the television world, we talk about co-viewing. And that means that two people can do something at the same time. And sometimes there are actually certain kinds of technologies that are built in that allow for that kind of co-play or co-facilitation or conversation, so that it doesn't end up being an either or situation. Either you play by yourself, or you don't play at all, with anyone else. So I think that's another piece too, to really try to find ways of integrating the ability to do something with someone else, with problem solving and questioning involved.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've read is that there's a new digital divide. So I'd say a decade ago, people were talking about the digital divide as who had and who didn't have tools, iPads, computers. Now people are talking about the digital divide differently as who and how people use technology by groups. Are you just using it to play games, or what are you using it for? And there's a new, and I'm really intrigued, Deb, especially that you've seen this kind of tremendous progress with your children, very low income children in public schools and in Head Start. I wonder, does that idea of the new digital divide, does that square with you? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, what I've seen over the years in different classrooms in different school districts, because every school district I've worked in 4 different ones, there is a digital divide. I've been in schools where, for example, I implemented my device one-to-one to my students, and I created my lessons for my students to go and grab. Like I mentioned before, I flipped my math lessons and pushed those out to my students and parents. In other classrooms, they use the devices strictly for testing. So there is a lot of computerized testing, and I've seen a lot of that where they, instead of using or utilizing the device they have at hand for purposeful, effective instruction, they're using it strictly for testing. And so that right there is a little, I'm seeing that across different school districts, and specifically in the areas that I've taught in, which is in these low socioeconomic, they're talking about numbers. We got to get their reading levels up. We got to do this. We got to do that. Let's test. But they only use those computers for testing versus for effective instruction.
Very interesting. Do you see this, LaToya? Is this something that you see? How do you think about the digital divide these days?
It's tricky. Maybe because I'm a researcher, I would want to read that study before I comment on that. But just anecdotally, personally, I guess maybe it's the nature of my vantage point is that I'm often there having conversations with teams and kids and families and teachers years before the thing comes out, even and trying to figure out how to do things that they haven't done before. And I know that realistically, we have found that a divide in the quality of the bandwidth access to digital technologies has impacted our research. So, because we're often testing things that are, very new technologies, we have to have certain requirements in order to participate in the study. And that can mean that some families wouldn't get to participate if they didn't have access to those tools. So for example, we were testing a science app, at one point, and we needed to help families. We needed to deliver the actual tablets to the families so that they could participate, not because they didn't necessarily have tablets at home, but because we couldn't be sure that they had the bandwidth to sustain continued play and exploration in the science experiments because of whatever whatever their internet restrictions were or abilities were. So in that way, we have seen how a divide in access to bandwidth and to internet has impacted our research.
Thank you, LaToya. And I'm going to give you the last word. There's lots of things in the chat that people are writing. So once again, I want to encourage you to click the link if you want to interact with our panelists following this 1-hour webinar. And Ed, I'm going to let you have the last word before we close out and go to the interactive link.
Great. I want to thank Deb and LaToya for giving us the perspectives, the on-the-ground perspectives that help us to see both behind what this tech does as well as what we can do. I'd like to close with a quote from Fred Rogers. He said, "No matter how helpful computers are as tools, and of course they can be very helpful tools, they don't begin to compare significance to the teacher-child relationship, which is human and mutual. A computer can help you learn to spell hug, but it can never know the risk or the joy of actually giving or receiving one." And I think that that's a concept and an approach that I think we can build into our approaches to multiple forms of digital media and technology, to always try to find ways that we can engage in that risk and joy having to do with the human element. And that's something that I think we can begin to work on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And let me add my thanks to you, Ed, and to LaToya and to Deb. I've really learned a lot from this conversation, and I really look forward to interacting more with our guests and some of the many questions that I see that people are typing in the chat. So as we just move forward with the PowerPoint for a moment, we will see that we still want to encourage you to write any comments that you have. We want you to know that we'll be sending you a follow-up email tomorrow with resources that you can use, book links, upcoming events. And we really want you to think about how you can change the game for young children in the technology area in terms of equity, working with their families, thinking about strong ways of supporting their learning, and some of the social and societal impacts of this work. It's a really important conversation. So if you've been listening and you want to know more about the Alpha Generation, there's a promo code VALORA, which can help you to get a discount on the book. And If you can, we encourage you to sign up for our next webinar, which we're going to talk about how we can change the game for Black children and what's going on with young Black children today. So please join us. Thank you for coming to this CAYL conversation. We very much appreciate your time. And we want to encourage you now to click the link and join us in the conversation with our panelists. Thank you. Bye-bye.